Hello, twisted humans.
Do you find yourself wanting to know more about the latest murder, conspiracy, cult, or haunting?
Then this is the podcast for you. I'm Alicia.
And I'm Sierra, and this is
Twisted and Uncorked.
Speaking of
Trash.
let me tell you this thing I learned. I don't know how to say this word, so I'm going to attempt.
Do your best. Sound it out.
Scaphism? Scaphism? Scaphism. Scaphism.
Yeah, that sounds right.
It's an ancient form of torture where you cover the person you're trying to torture with honey, stick them in a hollowed log, and just leave them. Just leave them. Just, let them sit there until all the bugs, do what they do to them.
Oh my god, no.
Yeah, they're basically like eaten alive by insects.
And I'm sorry, that's a form of what?
Ancient form of torture and execution.
In where? I have heard of so many, but that's a new one.
Let me double check. Where was
Honey? That's like old school. Like you're not even getting fucked up creative. You're just like, what do we got laying around?
Yeah. Ancient Persia.
Oh.
You
want to know what's
however, this one says that you sealed the victim between two boats and fed him milk and honey, overfeeding him milk and honey so that his face is covered with milk and honey, and the bugs would only torture his face. Either way, that sounds awful.
Horrible.
Yeah. It's like gluttony.
Either way.
Like from the movie Seven, but like,
he
gets eaten.
Oh,
Yeah. How long did it take to die from scaphism? Sorry, I just found another thing.
Oh god, she's going on a rabbit hole.
I am. It took place in swamps where only torturers were present, and in some cases, the people affected by the victim's crime were also present. Furthermore, as mentioned above, it took days or even weeks for a victim to die, and the longest time a victim took to die was a painful 17 days. Ugh. What? I have, creep chills.
I have learned about so many medieval torture mechanisms over the years, but that is a new one.
That is disgusting.
That's unsettling on so many levels.
Mm-hmm.
You know how we're always on the same wavelength in natural fashion?
Uh-huh.
I've also got a torture tool for you.
No way!
Have you ever heard of the blood eagle?
No.
Should I show you a picture first, or should I
Yes,
tell you what it is?
I want to see the picture.
Okay. Hold on.
Also, by the way, I think I just found the gnat in my drink, but I took it out. It's fine.
In the end, you still won.
Yeah. Oh, God, what is happening to this person?
So, basically, the blood eagle is a ritualistic method of execution detailed in certain medieval periods. So basically, the person was placed on their stomachs, or what is called the prone position, and their ribs were severed from their spine with a sharp tool. Their lungs were then pulled open to create a pair of wings. The continuing debate about the next steps lives in infamy, but basically they're pulling your ribs outward to create a wing-like pattern like you saw in that picture.
Why?
I know. So basically, they separate your ribs so that they're not like held together with their muscle and their bits, so that they kind of fillet open, and then they open your lungs up, and then they just like pull your ribs out. Isn't that horrible?
Disgusting and awful.
I've never
and
actually
I'm
seen a
glad-
sketch of it, and you're
glad
glad
we don't,
that
like, torture
the
people
modern
anymore.
age doesn't do this shit.
Yeah, seriously.
Well, whatever your honey nonsense is, almost, I don't know. I can't decide what's less humane. Mine or yours?
Yeah, I can't either. That is
So
awful
guys,
and
what would you,
inhumane.
how would you rather die? How would you rather die? Would you rather have your ribs filleted open, or would you rather be force-fed honey and milk until bugs feasted on your face for 17 days?
Welcome.
I think
Sorry for that. Sorry.
Welcome to the Medieval Torture Podcast, where we traumatize you into never wanting to listen to anything again or sleep. You're welcome.
Jesus. Okay.
But in all
What a-
seriousness, welcome to Sierra's Cult episode 13.
13.
13. You
Sorry.
can't, you're counting backwards. I was counting a different number altogether the last episode. We're on a roll, guys. As it turns
Can
out,
we
anything
just-
over 10 is too hard. We just gotta restart.
Yeah. Can we just point out, though, like, being 100% honest, we did not plan on those weird things we just told each other, both being medieval torture things. Like, that's insane how in sync we are.
It happens a lot, though, with the bugs
Yeah.
and the ocean and the
Yeah.
medieval
These are never
torture.
planned, I promise. It's
No, guys, we have
insane.
no idea.
This week we are drinking sangria. This recipe calls for, let's see here, a third cup of our white Zinfandel from last week. The juice
Which I did
of
not
one
remind
lemon.
you to save, but you should know.
You should know. The juice of one lemon, some granulated sugar, some peaches, some apples, red currants. How do you say
Currants,
that?
yep. Currants.
Currants. That are not in season, so we just did not add. And then club soda. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy.
Lemon
Literally,
squeezy.
lemon squeezy.
Literally lemon
delicious.
squeezy. It is really good. So for this particular wine that we drank last week, which was Gallo Family White Zinfandel, I would argue that you could probably get away with maybe half the sugar, if not eliminate it altogether, because this particular rosé is actually very sweet. I forgot how sweet it was until we tried it. So I only did half the sugar for the recipe. And then with the apples and the peaches, I find it absolutely scrumptious.
So, anyway,
Lay it
today
on
we
me.
are talking about another cult case. My cult case is one that I was going to do for a bonus, but then I was like, this is too good not to let everyone hear. So here I am, telling it to everyone.
She's making small sacrifices, guys.
Also, my bonus was pretty good, too, for last month, for the month of March.
Oh my God, it was
So if
so
you haven't
good.
listened to that, / watched the new documentary about the newest alien conspiracy theory, you need to.
Do both
It's
of those
amazing.
things? Do both of those things.
Yeah. Let's get started. So, in 2004 and 2005, now I have to burp, really?
Because I'm slap happy. Before you get into your case, do you want to know what went through my head when you said, let's get down to business?
What?
To
defeat the Huns?
The Huns.
We're the same person!
You might get a concert after your story.
Now, time to defeat the Huns. Here we go. In 2004 and 2005, bad things happened all over the world. But there is only one thing, one murder, that was really on everyone's mind. And that's because the media put it there. Do you know what it was? 2004, 2005 murder. Nothing to do with cults. Nothing to do with this story. I just wanted to mention it. Lacey.
I'm sure it will. Yellow!
Peterson.
I was like, as soon as you said it, I was like, I bet you it's the fucking Peterson case.
Yeah. So, obviously, that's not the story I'm going to talk about because we're doing cults. But I am going to talk about one of the terrible things that happened at the same time that didn't get as much press. But it was, I mean, in the eyes of the media, it just wasn't that interesting. But it's extremely interesting and outrageous now looking back on it.
Yeah.
So, this incident occurred on March 12th, 2004, and is known as the Fresno Vampire Cult.
Yes, I'm so happy you're covering this.
Okay. You do know what it is, huh? A man named Marcus Wesson was at his home with his family was at his home with his many children getting some chores done. Marcus Wesson had like a lot of kids. I think there were 18 total, but it's honestly hard to tell the exact amount that were considered his kids because some of the kids he raised were his nieces and nephews. Oh, that's a whole different story. We're not even there yet. We'll get to
Okay, I thought that was going to be your next sentence, and I was like, yeah, no. Is that technically your child?
I'm pretty sure that 18 were fathered by him biologically, and then his nieces and nephews added up to even more than the 18. But by 2004, most of the nieces and nephews were old enough to have moved out, and so had some of his children. So there were 9 of his children in the home helping him with the chores. 25-year-old Sabrina, 17-year-old Lise, 8-year-old Ilabelle, 7-year-old Aviv, 7-year-old Jonathan, 4-year-old Ethan, 2-year-old Sedona, 2-year-old Marche, and 1-year-old Jeva. One of the chores on the list for the day was preparing their bus for travel. It was a school bus that Marcus had acquired that he was transforming into some sort of a travel trailer so the family could go on the road together. The home they were living in was actually a commercial building. It was supposed to be a business not suitable for living in, and Marcus had been warned multiple times by the state of California that he had to vacate the premises. So there was a bit of a time constraint. He was trying to get this bus done fast. However, on this day in March, the chores would not be getting done because there were other people in Marcus's family that had a different plan of events scheduled. Marcus's wife Elizabeth had gone to one of her older niece's homes, one of the many who was raised by Marcus. There was a large family gathering at the home. A few more nieces and nephews and cousins and uncles. Elizabeth, not having been invited to this event, was confused. They told her that they were planning a barbecue, but they had to run out to get some things. They asked Elizabeth to stay at the house and wait for them to get back while the entire rest of the family left. Which is like super weird, by the way, right? Like, why would they expect her to believe? Like, she just got there. She wasn't invited. But hey, by the way, stay here. We're going to go out and get all the food for this. Just stay here by yourself. Like, how did she not expect this to be a super sketchy thing? I don't know. They totally just ditched her. And obviously, they were not actually planning a barbecue.
It's never a barbecue, just like it's never a mannequin.
Exactly. These family members actually went straight to Marcus's house. They knew he was planning on taking all of the kids to live on the road shortly, and they did not approve of it. They were determined to take the children away from Marcus, and they actually had a bit of a leg to stand on in this fight. When they arrived at Marcus's house, 2 of Marcus's nieces, Sophina and Ruby, were determined to take 2 of the younger children with them. Marcus was distracted by Ruby, and Sophina went inside the home to convince the kids to leave with them. But the kids didn't want to go. And the older ones wouldn't allow the younger ones to be taken. The whole situation became a big fight. The police were called on 5 different occasions by members of the family from the quote-unquote barbecue. That wasn't really a barbecue. The first call The first call was just stating that they needed police support in a child custody matter. But the dispatchers told them that the police had to respond to more urgent calls first. Every call after that became more and more serious. The caller would say, "I think this is becoming an urgent matter." And then, "It's getting physical." And then, "People are fighting." And, "I think someone has a gun." All of the different calls claiming the situation was getting more and more serious made the dispatchers believe that the person calling was exaggerating because they wanted to be moved up to the top of the call list. The police did not take this situation seriously, and they took their time getting to the scene. But it actually was a pretty serious situation by that time. There was fighting and heated arguments and excessive yelling. When the police finally showed up, the family outside was frantic, telling the police that the children inside were in danger and being held captive by a man named Marcus Wesson, a man who was the children's father or uncle or grandfather.
Ew.
Whatever. Yeah. The police were not expecting this call to be this complicated.
Yeah, right? They're like, "We're not sure. I'll just cover all my bases just to be sure."
Yeah. The police assured the family outside that they'd get it taken care of, and they went to talk to Marcus. Marcus explained that while some of these women may be the legal mothers of some of the children living with him, he had been raising the children since their birth. These women gave their children to him, and he was all they knew as a parent. But that's not how this works, and courts had to be involved with the transfer of custody of a child, and they weren't. So no matter how many years they had been with Marcus in his care, they weren't his kids on paper. So,
No.
that wasn't good enough for him to keep them. And the police told him that and decided to call Child Protective Services. The police had communicated with each other not to let Marcus out of their sight in case the family's suspicions about him being dangerous was true. But with all of the chaos that was going on and all the family members there, it wasn't gonna be easy. People were running into the house, being shoved out of the house, and then Marcus's wife, Elizabeth, finally arrived back home. The 9 children that were in the home with Marcus barricaded themselves in a back bedroom. Sophina, who was there to take children with her, tried to push herself into the bedroom. She saw the children standing there, looking at her completely silent while she cried out for them to come with her. The oldest, still living with Marcus, 25-year-old Sabrina, was rummaging through a leather bag in that back bedroom. All of the other kids pushed Sophina out of the room and locked the door. Sophina ran to get help from the police, telling them something bad was about to happen. There were no real signs of the children being in distress, other than what the family outside was telling them, and the police didn't have a warrant to enter the home, so there wasn't much they could do, I guess, legally. They called Child Protective Services already, and they were just waiting for them to come in and take care of the family dispute. But then they realized that Marcus had gone out of their view. He must have gone in the house with the children. His wife Elizabeth ran into the house to find him, all the way to the back bedroom. She wasn't in there long before running back out and screaming, "They're all gone," before fainting on the front lawn.
Oh.
Still confused, but a bit more worried now, the police drew their weapons and aimed them at the home, asking all the family members to stand back and yelling for Marcus to exit. They were at a standoff for about an hour and a half, with the family outside still yelling and screaming. Some people said they heard gunshots, but the police were so baffled by everything taking place and the sounds of all the yelling that they couldn't be sure that the noises were real or just the family's minds playing tricks on them, and they didn't want to risk entering without a warrant. After that hour and a half that felt like forever, Marcus finally exited the building with his hands up, surrendering to the police, covered in blood.
Awesome.
Marcus was immediately arrested, and the officers went inside to discover the horror that had taken place. Inside this building, the police found antique coffins all over the home. There were
What?
no beds, only coffins.
Okay.
Marcus and his family claimed that he had used them to take apart and build furniture with the antique wood. But they took up so much space that the family members had to use them to sleep in as well.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So
Out
casual,
of convenience, though. Yeah,
casual
casually.
furniture, casual bed. Okay, gotcha. Yeah, gotcha. Picking that up.
It was a scary sight for them to see in such an eerily quiet home in which a man covered in blood had just exited. They opened all of the coffins, but they were all empty. And then later, after the coffins were taken in for evidence testing, there were no fingerprints found on them, not even from the officers who had opened them, which they actually expected to find on there and rule out. But there were 0 fingerprints at all. In the back bedroom of the home, the police discovered a pile of 9 bodies. Before considering the evidence, the officer checked for pulses. Sadly, every person in the pile had no pulse. On the top of the pile was 25-year-old Sabrina. She was shot in her right eye and had died the most recent of the 9. Under her body was a gun that was taken into evidence, but the gun had no fingerprints on it, and both Sabrina and Marcus tested negative for gunshot residue. The next body in the pile belonged to 17-year-old Lise. She was shot in her right eye as well, but 2 times. Once was shot from a close range, and the other was from farther away. Under her body was a knife. The knife fit the satchel that was around Marcus's waist, but Lise was seen earlier in the chaos by police taking something from Marcus's waist, so Marcus may have nothing to do with the knife being there. Under Lise was 1-year-old Jeva, whose name, by the way, was apparently meant to be a play on the words Jesus, Je, and vampire, Va, Jeva. She was also shot in the right eye. Next was 2-year-old Sedona, also shot in the right eye. Marche, also 2, was the next victim in the pile. He was the only one who was shot in the left eye instead of the right.
Interesting.
4-year-old Ethan was next. He was shot in his right eye, but also had a bullet wound on the side of his abdomen, which could have been a ricochet of another bullet since it wasn't a straight-through wound. 8-year-old Isla Bell was found under Ethan, also shot in the right eye. And the last 2 in the pile, the first 2 to have died, were Aviv and Jonathan, both 7 years old. The whole event was shocking and unexpected to the police, but the more they talked to the surviving family members, the more they learned just how expected these events were, and just how difficult the trial was going to be. Marcus was covered in his children's blood, but there was a real possibility that he didn't kill any of them. In fact, after the autopsies were done, almost all of the children were said to have died 2 hours before Marcus came out of the home, back when he was seen by the police to be in the front yard talking to them. He was eventually found guilty of the murders, but it wasn't because he did it. It was because he was their leader, and their family was all part of this vampire cult he had created. So, Marcus was born in 1946 in Kansas to a religious fanatic Seventh-day Adventist mother and an alcoholic, abusive father who was in and out of his life. In the 60s, he, his mother, and his 3 siblings moved to California, and he joined the Army for a little while. When he left the military, he came back to California, and he met a woman named Rosemary Solario, who was 13 years older than him, and he moved in with her and her many children. Marcus and Rosemary had a child together, a son, but they didn't stay together very long. At the age of 28, Marcus began sexually abusing Rosemary's 8-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, and by the time she was 15, he, now 35, had married her, and they were having a child together.
Ew.
So now Elizabeth's brother is also her nephew, and Marcus's baby mama is also his sister-in-law. So his son's siblings are his nieces
Get out
and
a map.
nephews.
Hold on.
It's a mess.
Gotta draw it out. I would draw it out, but I'm gonna try not to puke over here.
It gets easier. Rosemary, the mother of all these children, who he met, eventually just gave up her children to Marcus to raise. She had a bit of a drug problem and decided that he could be a better parent to them than she could. And he kind of already had her completely brainwashed. Yeah. No, she was completely brainwashed by this man. But anyway, in doing that, basically all of his nieces and nephews became his children as well. The only weird part is Elizabeth, who had once been their sister, was now acting as their mother. So one of the children that So the one child that he had with Rosemary, the 10 kids he eventually had with his child bride Elizabeth, they had 10 kids, by the way, and the 7 others that were in the house with him that day are what makes up the 18 biological children he had. And then again, he also raised Rosemary's kids, who were actually his nieces and nephews.
Gotcha.
Marcus, having been raised by a religious fanatic, was a bit of a fanatic himself, and he had brainwashed all of the children in his life to follow him in his ways. His ways were much different than anything he'd probably ever heard of. Marcus was creating his own religion. He'd take bits and pieces from other religions and use them to his advantage, but leave out anything that didn't suit him or benefit him. You know, like most cults. He was creating his vampire cult. He believed that God, or maybe Jesus, it's really hard to tell which one, was a vampire. So maybe those coffins weren't just for decorating after all. The kids in the family never really went outside. Neighbors stated that they didn't even know Marcus had children. There were older people who went in and out of the home, the other kids, older kids, who had jobs since Marcus and his wife didn't have any income. But the little kids never went anywhere. And besides that, they had lived in so many different places, so it's not like the neighbors really got to know the family well. Once they lived in a little shack in the woods. Once they lived in a travel trailer. Multiple times they lived on different boats. Never a houseboat, by the way. Just random little tiny boats that he crammed all of the kids into. Yeah.
Thanks for clarifying.
The whole time that Marcus was raising Rosemary's children, he was having them teach each other and having them teach his younger kids that he had with Elizabeth. So literally teach. They didn't go to school. None of them went to school.
That's horrible.
He was also teaching them about his vampire Bible that he wrote himself. Rosemary and Elizabeth both got government assistance and welfare for the kids that they had, and they gave the money directly to Marcus. Even though Marcus was never on any of the birth certificates of the children because he didn't trust the government. Once the older kids got to the age of being able to work, he allowed them to go out and get jobs so that they could bring the money back to him as well. If they weren't going to give him the money back, then they weren't allowed to go. It was part of their responsibility as a member of their family, quote unquote, according to him. And the boys, the nephews and the sons, understood this and completely agreed with it. But they were given much more freedom than the girls. The girls were forbidden to talk to any other men than the family members. Marcus also had daily meetings with the girl children of the family. Only children, not his wife, and only the girls, including his daughters and nieces, never his sons or nephews. His meetings were said to be him teaching the girls how to be proper women. We know that Marcus has already molested one child at age 8. That was the one who eventually became his wife, Elizabeth. But it's hard to say when he started molesting his nieces. Which he definitely did, by the way, because many of them were impregnated by Marcus.
Ew.
One of the children who he fathered, his own child, said that they remember the quote-unquote loving, which is what Marcus called it, starting after he saw David Koresh and the Jonestown massacre incident on TV. David Koresh was a baptized Seventh-day Adventist, which is the same religion that Marcus grew up in as a child. He said that Koresh was doing what he needed to do for God and that it was honorable. Marcus also said in relation to that event that he felt the need to create more children for God and even a pure race of vampire children for God. And with that, he began impregnating his own children. So his children, who were fathered by him biologically, even came out and said that starting at 7 or 8, Marcus started teaching them how to properly love a man. He would, I almost vomit every time I write this. I've never said it out loud yet, so let's see what happens.
Oh, no.
He'd touch them under the blankets and tell them that this is what love felt like. He'd teach them how to kiss, and he'd teach them how to satisfy him orally. Oh, yeah. I can feel it in my throat.
Yeah, you get that, like...
Yeah, like it's right there. He also married each girl, including his own daughters, in a spiritual ceremony over the vampire Bible that he wrote. So it seems that the reason he was so strict with them meeting other men is because he wanted them to himself. Also, he told each of the girls not to tell their siblings about their love for each other. He'd tell them that the other siblings would be jealous. So none of them knew that this was happening to the others. They actually each thought that they were special in a way with him. And I'm like gagging over here. I'm sorry.
I know. It's okay. It's not just you. I'm like unsettled right now. I feel like we just take a swig.
So like it's not their fault at all. But
no, 100%. This is what they're believing to think is normal and accepted,
Yeah.
and what their
they
primary
thought they had
caregiver
this
wants.
special bond with Marcus. Even though he was their dad, they didn't realize that was wrong. They thought that each one thought, I have this special bond with Marcus, not knowing that Marcus was doing this with every single one of their sisters. Okay. The boys in the family didn't suspect anything at all. They had no idea that Marcus was molesting or quote-unquote loving anyone other than Elizabeth, the mother. According to Elizabeth, she didn't know either. However, one of the nieces said on trial that Elizabeth actually walked in on the niece, orally pleasuring Marcus, and was upset about it. After the incident, she said she heard Elizabeth telling Marcus not to do these things while she was home because she does not want to be involved in knowing that it's taking place. So, like, again, it's hard to blame Elizabeth because she was 8 years old when this started happening to her. But knowing that it's bad enough to be like, I don't want to know that this is happening, but not doing anything about it makes me mad.
And how old is she at this point? Like,
let's see, she was
late
15 when they got
teens?
married.
Or-
He has other kids that he's having sex with, so at least 25, at least. Yeah.
And that just goes to show you being in that situation so young and under the belief that that's normal, what kind of effects that actually has on you. Because that's not a
Right.
normal response to have to that situation happening, is that I just don't want to
definitely
know
not.
that it's happening. Ugh.
Of the 9 children who were killed in the incident, only 2 of them were mothered by his wife, his actual legal wife, Elizabeth. The other 7 were mothered by 2 of his daughters and 3 of his nieces.
Ew.
Marcus was the biological father of all of these children. But no one knew except the person that was pregnant. They would tell their mother, Elizabeth or Rosemary, and their siblings that they were injected with sperm from the hospital because they chose to be surrogate mothers for Marcus and Elizabeth, and that they were going to give their child to Marcus so that he could raise them as a child for God.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Sure.
Marcus was not great at raising children, by the way. I mean,
would've thunk it?
other than literally molesting his own children, He also
Parenting
beat-
rule 101.
Oh, yeah.
Don't
You
do that.
Don't fucking do that. Well, he also
Parenting
beat the
rule number
children.
2. Don't beat your children.
Yeah, as babies. If they cried for no reason, which all infants do, he'd say that the mother needed to beat them until they stopped. He had a specific stick that was supposed to be used to hit the children in the legs. Obviously, hitting a already crying
more.
child would only cause the child to cry more. So the mothers were made to hit their children in the legs, sometimes causing them to bleed, over and over again, until the children literally cried themselves to sleep.
Just like they passed out.
Yes. The mothers all stated that they hated doing this, but Marcus would tell them that if they didn't do it, he was going to do it. And Elizabeth would always tell her daughters and nieces that the children, I say nieces, but actually it's her sisters anyway, the ones that had children, that it is best for you to do the hitting yourself, because if Marcus has to do it, it's going to be much worse. So they did. They hit their children.
Probably incorrect, but also, like, that's an impossible decision to even think about. Like,
Yes.
oh my god. No, you don't hit infants. Ugh.
Yeah. So
They don't know.
Marcus-
They cry when they need something.
they cry when they need love.
Anything,
too. Like,
love,
it's not just
food,
like,
sleep,
I'm
yeah.
hungry, I'm tired, I pooped. It's also, hold me.
Pick
I
me
love
up and
you
hold
and
me,
I
yeah.
feel away from you. Yeah. So
Ugh.
Marcus, being the one in charge of raising the girls' children, is what made them want to stay there with him, the girls. At one point, Sophina, who was one of the nieces, when she was, living with Marcus and under his control, wanted to go live with her aunt because Marcus was mad that she had kissed a boy at her work. He told her that if she did go to live with her aunt, then she would never be allowed to come back to the family where her 2-year-old son was, and she would never be allowed to talk to her sisters again. But Marcus said, that's what you want? Okay, let's go. And he began driving her to her aunt's house. On the way there, he stabbed her in the chest in the van while he drove.
Not gonna
Sophina
be that
passed
easy.
out, and when she came to, Marcus asked if she was ready to go and be with the Lord. Obviously, Sophina assumed that Marcus meant he was going to kill her. She said no over and over again and said that she wasn't ready. And in reply, Marcus started crying and apologized to her, saying that he thought this was what she wanted. Eventually, he took her back home to the boat where they had lived at the time, and Sophina decided it was probably best to stay and be with her child to protect him and to never talk about leaving again. Sophina actually kept in contact with her work boyfriend, and she fell in love with him. They wanted to get married, and she even got pregnant by him. So she did eventually run away, and she left her son with Marcus and, the rest of the family. After running away and having what she felt was a normal life now, Sophina wanted that child that she had with Marcus back. Now, 7-year-old Jonathan. I know. I don't know. It's
Desperate times, though, right? Like,
yeah, I don't think I could, but I've never been in that situation, and also I feel like she just needed to get out, and
regroup
Marcus
and
had
figure out
all
a
of the
plan,
children brainwashed. So the
Yeah,
child would
exactly.
probably be like, Marcus,
I don't
why
wanna
is
go.
this lady trying to take me? Yeah. They
Yeah.
didn't even know their moms as moms because they were surrogates,
Yeah, that's fucked.
Yeah.
Ugh, these poor women.
So 7-year-old Jonathan was Sophina's son, and he was in the house that day. Sophina's sister Ruby, who had also run away from the family, wanted her 7-year-old daughter Aviv back as well. She was also in the house that day. They were the first two who were killed that day. That's why they were there at the house, because they were trying to get their children back. Sophina and Ruby had been talking to each other about all the things that they had endured in the past. finally telling each other their secrets, finally realizing just how bad and cult-like their family was. And they knew that they had to save their children. Marcus and the family were leaving to live on the road. That's why the bus was being fixed. And the girls were scared that once they went on the road, they'd never be able to track down their children again. And worse than that, they knew that Marcus was brainwashing the family because they were once brainwashed too.
And then the longer they're away from their kids, the less influence or reason that they have with them.
Everyone in the family thought that Marcus was either God himself or maybe he was Jesus. Either way, he was definitely a vampire and definitely creating a pure vampire race to return to God when the time was right. Also, they all called Marcus their master. Even on the day of the incident, when all of that was taking place outside, while the police were there, they heard some of the men that were still brainwashed by Marcus and living with him yelling to the others who were there to get the kids to bow down to their master. Even scarier than all of this, Sophina knew firsthand what was going to happen if things got too bad outside of the house that day. In the past, when she was also brainwashed and living on the boat with the family, she was the one who was put in charge of sending herself and the other children to God if the government ever tried to separate the family. When Marcus was away one day...
So literally drink the Kool-Aid and we'll all die together.
Pretty much. When Marcus was away one day, Sophina noticed that there were white progressive vans circling the boat dock. Being a child and having never left the tugboat or interacting with the outside world, she had no idea that Progressive was an insurance agency. She thought the vans were there, circling them to take them away from their master while he was out. So, as instructed by Marcus, if the government ever came, Sophia loaded a gun and instructed another child, Gypsy, to write a note. It said, quote, "We did this to ourselves. It's nobody's fault. We don't want to be separated." End quote. The older children on the boat were ready to kill the younger ones and then kill themselves. But Sophina felt weird making this decision without Marcus's approval. So she decided to call him and tell him what was happening, and she asked permission to send her and her siblings to God. Marcus told her this wasn't the right time yet, and Sophina told the other children that the plan was off. So, literally, she was about to just commit murder-suicide, but then called Marcus, and Marcus was like, "Silly kids, that's a progressive van. No, God's not ready for you yet. Don't worry."
That is the most reasonable thing this man has said.
Yeah. Jesus. That incident had happened at least 6 years, but possibly more, than this March 12th, 2004 one. But it seemed very relevant. The government was at the door, threatening to take the kids. The kids were now all dead. And no one knows who did it. Since, again, Marcus and Sabrina both didn't have gunshot residue on their hands. Did one of the children commit murder-suicide? In the trial for this incident, Marcus was being charged with 9 counts of murder. The defense claimed that Sabrina was the one who killed the others and then killed herself. The prosecutors agreed, but argued that the only reason that Sabrina did this was because it was what Marcus had wanted and told her to do. In the end, the jurors agreed that even though he wasn't responsible for pulling the trigger, and they still didn't know who was, Marcus was responsible for the deaths of all 9 children.
Of course he was.
Oh, yeah. He was found guilty of 9 counts of first-degree murder and 14 counts of sexual molestation of 7 of his daughters and nieces. Some of his surviving children and nieces asked that he be sentenced to death, while others asked that he be sentenced to life instead, blaming the whole incident on Ruby and Sophina for forcing the children to have to enact their murder-suicide pact. They said that they had all known about the pact and that they knew that when the girls decided to leave the family, that meant they were supposed to give up being the mother of their children And coming back to try to take them was wrong. That's the only reason they had to die, is because those girls were trying to take their children back.
Oh, because they
How
finally saw
brainwashed.
reason.
Ugh.
Sure.
Marcus was sentenced to death in 2005, but since then, California has removed the death penalty. And so he
Fucking
is still
California.
alive to this day, sitting in San Quentin State Prison.
Oh, he's
For a
in San
while-
Quentin? That sucks.
Yeah. For a while, his wife Elizabeth and some of his sons and nephews continued to visit him, even saying that they had forgiven him for his sins because that is what God would want. And the book that I read for this information is called By Their Father's Hand, The True Story of the Wesson Family Massacre. And it's written by Monty Francis, who was a journalist that was following this case as it was happening when everybody else was following the Scott Peterson case.
Yeah.
Monty Francis also reached out to Marcus Wesson for comments while he was in prison. He did get some letters from Wesson, but most of it wasn't super understandable. Here's a few quotes that I took from the first letter, just so you have a sense of his headspace. Hello, Monty. Since you are the only one left who can tell the world what happened, it is of the foregone words that I do languish. The world should know what really happened, but I was not allowed to tell of such. I only hope that you can understand of mine intentions to preserve of its revelation until I establish it to the Supreme Court. Then I will divulge of its entirety to you, maybe sooner than you think. Then later in this letter, he started to describe the book that he wrote, his vampire Bible, that was called In the Night of the Light for the Dark. He says, At times I speak from the perspective of the master, and at other times the narrative does parallel mine own life and the lives of certain of my family members. Yes, this book has the answers to all living, the dead, and undead, the beginning and the end. I intend for this book to reach of those interested in truth of the unknown to most man.
I pray that this book
So,
reaches no one.
Yeah, it doesn't. He fully believes himself that he's like a vampire and shit. But when they tried to get him a psych test, he refused to be called mentally unfit by anyone. He was like, I'm not. I'm fucking not. Like, I'm good. I'm fine.
How does somebody know that they're not sounding crazy, for lack of a better word? If, like, people that actually believe everything that he's saying would be like, sure, take a psych test on me.
Yeah.
Like, I got nothing to prove. I stand by my beliefs. This is my proof to it. He is such a fucking coward.
Yeah, he's I don't even want to say insane or crazy, because I don't want to ever classify him in the same sense as somebody
that's mentally
in
unwell
bad taste classify those people. Yes. Yeah, so like he is deranged.
Yeah.
Like
there's no better word for it. Yep. Good job. Deranged.
This journalist, Monty, also reached out to Sofina for comment after everything happened. When asked to speak about her family members who accused her of being responsible for the deaths of the rest of her family, she said, I just want to say that it's not our fault. We didn't pull the trigger. We all have a choice in life. They all made their choice. I still don't believe in the death penalty, but he got it. And that's because that's what he deserves. He did what he did, but he was important to me. And for him to just be gone is going to hurt because he was important to me. When that day comes, it will be like somebody died, somebody that I knew and that I once loved. Oh. So even Sofina, who was there to rescue her child, whose child was murdered, is like still in that mind space because that's all she knew. Yeah. Still in that mind space of being like, you know, I loved him.
Like from being a child. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so insane.
But if he pulled that same "this is what love is" bullshit on her, which he inevitably did.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all she knows, which is even sadder.
It's awful. I'm glad she got out and was able to become unbrainwashed, but like to an extent she still has this love and these feelings for him, and it's just so sad. Ugh. Well, that is pretty much it. If you're interested in this story, I highly suggest the Audible book, By Their Father's Hand. It is a great read. There was a lot more detail that I was not able to provide here today, but I think I gave it enough to at least make you understand how brainwashed this family was by the leader of what was basically a cult that they were all a family of. I mean, it acted just like a cult did, you know what I mean? They
100%.
had to give over all of their possessions. He was in charge of all of them. It was a religion. It had all the defining things of a cult. It's awful.
Ritualistic or disturbed behavior by a group
Yeah.
for a collective goal. I'm not really
Even though
sure
they were
what
all biologically related
Yeah. It can still count as a
in the
cult.
grossest ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could be a cult. Technically, we're a cult. I mean, our beliefs and...
We don't have a religion.
No, we don't have a religion, but, you know, we have twisted humans. So technically, we're a cult.
Yeah.
Our higher goal and order is to just, you know, expose all the chaos in the world and drink wine while doing it. I don't know where I was going with that. Oh man, that case is crazier than I remember reading.
It is so
And
crazy.
you did such a great job. I don't think I could have done it that well, especially I didn't have an 8,000-page book, so.
Yeah. It was a long book.
Did you end up
I don't
getting
think
to
that
finish
was
it?
8,000 pages. Actually, I don't think it told me. It was, I think, 13 hours because I listened to it on Audible.
Oh, okay. That's crazy.
But, yeah. It was really good. It was really sad. I cried a lot.
Of course.
It was...
I almost cried 4
It's good,
times
though.
while you told me this story, so.
Oh, yeah. Gagging and all.
Just disgusting. Like, who do you think you are?
God. He thinks he's God. Literally.
Yeah, I know. Literally, as soon as I said it, I was like, I'm pretty sure that's where that saying came from. Like, who do you think you are? People that do this shit.
Yeah.
Stop looking at the bugs.
It's back.
It didn't die. I had a little bug too, but it wasn't a gnat. Oh my gosh.
But, yeah, it was insane. It was
That sounds
crazy.
great job.
It was an
Well done.
interesting ride. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, of course.
Hope you guys like this case.
Yeah, no kidding.
Let us know.
Yeah. And don't join any, you do you in the cult world, but, don't do it in such a way that it's damaging to other people. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't-
you need to respect other people.
yeah. Especially if your dad is Marcus Wesson.
Yeah. That's a mess.
Yeah.
Oh,
notice
he,
how I did
like I
dad.
said, he is still in prison. Also, he vowed
Yeah,
that he will
R.I.D.,
not...
sir. R.I.D.
Yeah, just die. He vowed that he will not cut his hair until he goes to see the Lord. So he has dreadlocks that are like
Oh, he's
all the
gross.
way down his back.
He is so gross. If anybody has not seen a picture
it's-
of
it's
Marcus
pretty
Wesson, do a quick Google search. Would not recommend that you
or
are
a quick
eating or
go to our
drinking at the time.
Instagram search.
Oh yeah, no,
Yeah.
actually, I take that back. Go to our Instagram, find our picture of that dreadlock rockin' motherfucker, and hit the follow button for us. Do not follow him.
Yes, do not. I'll also have a picture of the 9 who were killed on that day, as well as the bus that they were working on.
Yes, I'm actually very curious to see that. If
It
it is
actually looks super cool. I'm gonna sleep and hope and pray that I do not dream of this.
you know what? I'm gonna second that prayer for you and hope that you don't dream of this too, because Sierra's had some pretty wild nightmares
Please, aliens.
associated with our show. Please, aliens, be good to her.
Yeah.
We're making you a very beautiful cartoon in the process, okay? Love us.
Okay,
We'll
thank
chat
you.
later, okay? And if you also want to learn how to chat with aliens, you can go on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/twisted and uncorked. And no, it is not as crazy or as difficult as it sounds. And if you have
Not at
a
all.
crazy story you want to share with us, you can send that to our email, twistedanduncorked@hotmail or at Gmail. We want to read them, and if you want it read on the show, even better. We would be happy to share it with our audience. If you just want to say hi, you can do that there too. And you should be following us everywhere, which you can find on our link tree. And in the meantime, keep it twisted.
Keep it twisted.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Leanne.
And this is What's for Brunch, a podcast where we invite you to join us for conversations usually kept for Sunday brunch.
Every week we highlight one of our favorite brunch spots, then we discuss topics ranging from the lighthearted, like first dates, to more of life's serious struggles, like feeling as if you're not at the stage in your life that you should be at, or dealing with failure.
We hope that by sharing our personal stories with you, you won't feel as alone in life. So raise a glass and join us for brunch every Sunday.
For sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, follow us on Instagram at What's for Brunch Podcast.